I'll wire to 12 that. In my house, we'll bring it. Oh, yes, just more than different.
Gosh, I think it's in December. This year, they decided to switch Friday.
I mean, the environment.
Yep, so
Then somebody. So they're in it.
For age of reason, meeting a different day.
They want to switch up on. For research.
Alright, so I don't know what they call it. I'm gonna call them
Slide 2, 3, way, you know, the liberal and the left wing environmental.
I think the worst thing guys.
Not that I have with your team.
Or talk about.
It's all.
But I was trying to.
And they ran out of CFC to go after now, so they had to go after the hard wire.
The only thing worse than well, the other thing mine is just.
So that is.
Right. Oh, it's about like funds that aren't outdated.
And then they take that.
They're even just to the point.
All right, I'm gonna call this meeting to order. I pride myself on being on time and it almost didn't happen today. Parking's crazy out there. We are recording on the owl. I should make sure that it. While I do that, Steve, would you like to call the roll?
Underwood, Mr. Chair. Lacombe.
Here.
Time. Martinez.
Wait,
Wayne.
wait,
Here.
answer him.
Hi. You're here. Oh, yeah. Okay. Hills and Daggers.
Here.
Morning.
Here.
Fairlesser.
Here.
Peters. Here. Olson. Here. Graybill.
Here.
Commissioner Munson. Jeffy. Okay, Madam Chair, you have quorum.
Excellent, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, we have received the minutes emailed to the committee, assuming everybody has had an opportunity to read through those. Is there any additions or corrections to the minutes from the September 17th, 2024 meeting? Great.
I would move that the minutes from the September 17th, 2024 meeting be approved as written.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All approve all approve of the minutes as motioned, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Seeing that the agenda item number 3 is Commissioner Munson, and he is not here yet. He's having as much problems parking as I am. We'll see him in 20. So we'll give him a little bit there. I will roll into item number 4 on the agenda, an update and discussion of the Missouri Valley Complex Fund review. I believe that largely relies on the input and reporting from Auditor Splonskowski. We've had this on the agenda for a couple of meetings now, and I know with elections coming up, he's probably quite busy. So I just wanted to ensure that this remained on the agenda in order to keep it top of mind. I will have Steve make sure that that's added to the agenda for the next one, and hopefully we will have a report there. If we are unable to get our report in November, I do plan on filing an open records request so that we can have that information as soon as we possibly can, because there's a lot of things that rely on understanding where the fund is at, how the monies have been deposited, what was from where, what selling of items. And then there were also some remaining questions about the interest.
Why are you having so much trouble getting the information?
That's a really good question. We've had Commissioner Munson report back a couple of meetings now that we have to get this information from the auditor, and I don't believe that we've seen Auditor Sponskowski at a committee meeting since May, June? Yeah, 2 months ago, so I guess.
I missed last two myself, but.
Yeah.
It seems like there should be a easier way to just get information.
I would agree.
Hmm.
Do you have suggestions?
Well, was our liaison to the county? Like, be able to help? No.
Yeah, there's been, there's been plenty of discussion back and forth with our county commissioner as well as the liaison from this committee to the county, and that's the information we've been provided, is that it has to come from the auditor. So hopefully Mark or Connie or Auditor Sponskowski will be able to attend and present in November. So stay tuned. We will table that item, I believe. Steamrolling right on through, we will hear an update and review of the rezoning for the Missouri Valley Complex. Representatives from Swenson and Hagen, I see in the audience. Yes.
All right, so my name is Jason Patrician. I work for Swenson Hagen, and recently we were tasked with facilitating starting with a zoning request, which would be followed up at some point in the future with a request for a replat. And so just to be clear, the zoning and platting process can coincide together. Although the zoning process is just a little longer process, so we can kick off the zoning process and get that started to start facilitating conversations with the city of Bismarck as we engage in the future for the platting. So what I passed out to you was the meeting notes from a pre-application meeting that we had recently with the city of Bismarck. And so the fairgrounds sits within the jurisdiction of the city of Bismarck. And so as we process plats in the future, we would be going through the city of Bismarck's process, and then we would also stop off at the county as well. The zoning process is pretty clear. What we were asking for a request is to go from the current zoning, which is PUD, Planned Unit Development, to a P Public. And so at some point in the past, this was asked for, and for whatever purposes was denied. But with the committee being part of this process and the city seeing kind of some of the history from how that PUD has been interacted with over the course of time, they've engaged positively to our request. So this review that we have is a staff review. We get all the departments together, and the document that you have in front of you is typical things that we would get in front of the city and discuss. So we kind of get to come and tell them ultimately what our, if you want to call it, our vision is of where we're trying to go. And so currently today, you have zoning that's PUD, and you have a plat that has a series of right-of-ways on it and lots. So that encumbers you in a couple different ways. Having a specific lot means that every single lot has setbacks applied to it. And it's very rigid in what you can do. So the analogy that I like to use in front of the city when we had that meeting was just imagine yourself being up at DSC, or let's say you're at University of Mary. That is one lot and it is managed by a group, right? And it has a lot of various different things that go on with that. Now, the city doesn't have to manage all those different tasks that go on. That's why the group is there. So this is much like that. The committee is a group of people that utilize and can also receive information from the public if there's uses in the public that want to be requested to be used. So we already have a platform, this group here, that has the ability to manage. And so now you start looking at the things like, what is that going to look like, right? So do you need to have right of way? Do you need to have lots? Right now you have a series of leases on some of the uses within the fairgrounds. And so as you move forward, and if we move away from a plat that has lots and right of way and go to a plat that is holistic as one parcel with a series of utility and access easements, now you have some free reign on space, right? You kind of open yourself up to make it, as you guys have talked about, as a complex. So some of the things that we talked about in here was who is actually in the plat. So right now, today, we have the fairgrounds complex, right? We have the state of North Dakota, who has a little finger where the Hay Creek crossing is on the west end of the property. And then we've got the detention center on the south end of the property. So the thing that we have to remember is that that PUD supersedes over everybody. So when we came in to talk about the fairgrounds, we quickly came to a conversation of, you know, what pieces do we bring in? Are we bringing in the fairgrounds? But there's a problem. So if we bring just the fairgrounds in, that means we have fairgrounds as P public, but then we have everybody else sitting here in a PUD. And so staff's request would be that we would bring everybody in to rezone everybody to a P public and effectively take out the whole PUD ordinance by processing this different direction. So now they're not trying to figure out how to track this mess as we move forward. So it's a kind of a housekeeping item and it cleans up things on, excuse me. So also long-term, this will get where we will have a lot for the state. They'll have their lot like they have it. The detention facility, they will have a lot. And then the whole fairgrounds proper would have a lot, right? And then that's where we can move this forward from those entities. Those entities will be P public, the city staff will support that for us to move forward. And then we can start talking about how we get to this next phase, which would be this plating thing. So the zoning request will have a couple stops. We'll go to planning and zoning, of course, and then we'll go to city commission for approval. And then anywhere in here, we can hold that to get the plat caught up. And so the conversation that we had is we wanted to take the city's temperature and see where everybody was landing on this. And that would better allow us to report back to this committee and then sequence that plan forward to start talking about platting and the plat then can follow along with that zone. And so some of the things that we did talk about were, of course, public utilities. The city does have and is going to be constructing a sewer line through the fairgrounds property to get to the east. Also, there's some public water mains, there's some lift stations, things like that. Those would be, of course, encumbered by utility easements. There's some overhead power lines, some underground utilities. Those would be encumbered by right of way as well. And then, of course, we've got floodplain and floodway, so we would have also some easements that would cover for stormwater and drainage, right? Then beyond that, for the fairgrounds proper, then we need to figure out ultimately, okay, where are we gonna put a road? And we encumber that by an access and utility easement. That's part of that infrastructure, right? So by having easements, we would be allowed then to have private roadways. We don't have to dedicate a full right of way width like you would have in town, which would have a boulevard and all those different things. But we have a spot, then we could house water lines and sewer lines, and that would help to get to everybody to help serve all the user groups. We talked about the processing of how the water infrastructure may look. So, the city of Bismarck has a policy. They have a, utility capital charge. And so with that capital charge, it says that every meter that is connected to a building will have a fee. So if you think about this in two different manners, we could run a private water line through here and the water could be divvied out internally, just managed internally. But then that would require possibly 2 meter manholes that would meter water to the complex. So this is something that United Tribes has. They have a water line that goes by on University Drive, and they've got 2 meter manholes and water's metered. So now if we asked for a 12-inch meter, we'd have $100,000 plus charge, right? So it kind of ends up being just a math equation. But let's say we had 10 users and they all had 3/4 inch meters for domestic use, not fire, then that could be a $5,000 charge per unit, so 50,000. So for the complex, what's more beneficial? The other thing is, if we had a public water main go through this area, then we could have fire hydrants that would be publicly maintained by the city. And we'd have, you know, that public infrastructure. So we'd have some support from the city in that regard. Under a private system, all of the infrastructure would be maintained by this group. So anything happens, you have a water main break, guess what? You gotta take money out of your funds to go do that. So that, we've asked the city to weigh in and have that discussion and say, you know, where do you guys land on that? Are you guys okay? Are you guys comfortable with providing us a public maintained line? We would house it in along the roads and put hydrants and all there. That can be important because if we're talking about communal things, right? Parking lots, campground, you know, not just buildings, we need fire protection just generally for the public. So there's a kind of a dynamic situation there. Sanitary sewer, there is some sanitary sewer lines run out there. Anything that would come up in the future would just be housed in easements and get to whatever particular thing that we need to get to. From a stormwater aspect, when you plat, the city requires, for a site plan or a plat, for the participant to produce a stormwater management plan. And that's usually, kicked off by what they call an SM04, and it's a scoping sheet. So that scoping sheet kind of says what our vision is, what our goal is, you know, what's going to be out here in the future. And then the city will go through their master plans and they will come back with some verbiage on what type of requirements we would have from a stormwater aspect. So stormwater volume, stormwater quantity, or quality can be applied to us. They've given us right now, just something that says, you know, when you get ready to bring that plat towards us, get that SM04 to us so that we can process that. So that's something that we will have to do as part of the planning process. People say, well, hey, I've got this waterway down here. I got Hay Creek, right? We just put it down there. Typically, how things have landed in the past is that that would be something that we would have to have stormwater management features, detention ponds, pond that's dry, only wet when it rains, drains out when it's done. We would have facilities like that sprinkled throughout the complex or in strategic locations to pick up things that would be viewed as an increase in stormwater runoff from the city's aspect. That's something that the city's pretty sensitive about. Hay Creek, has a lot of stormwater issues. And so they've been pretty strict about trying to keep those flows managed in those watersheds. That would take care of kind of our utility aspect. The city didn't really seem to have a big issue as far as, going to private roadways. So, as we move forward, you know, we would continue to engage with the city and move that conversation along. Moving on to the second page, we start talking about, you know, the uses. Again, we talked a little bit about, you know, the lot compared to multiple lots. That's something that I think they feel is a benefit. You know, they didn't have any strong opinion whether or not we carried 10 lots in here or a single lot. I think they, see some comfort in knowing that, you know, the committee is also the users that are here, right? So who would better to manage your uses than the people that are gonna be using it? Floodplain wise, and then this kind of goes a step further now, just to clarify, you know, as you develop long-term. So because there is, floodplain and floodway relative to the areas that it will be draining to, the city will require from a building, inspections, building permit standpoint, they'll, require us to produce, a floodplain development, application for anything that we bring in. So let's say you come in and you're gonna bring in a building, right? The city will require us to produce that floodplain development application. And that's something that the city would typically require of us in town, wherever we are developing, where we have, potential floodplain elevations in the area. Yes.
Yeah, is Bergen County Water Resource Board involved with this at all? With the floodplains and all that?
Burley County Resource
All these other
District,
category?
yep, they are actively out there looking at all these areas within the county.
I used to serve on that years ago,
Mhm.
so
Yeah,
kind of familiar with it.
you bet. Yeah, and when we submit the stormwater plan, that stormwater plan would also be submitted to the county, so the county engineer would also have a review, which is typical. So just so that we get concurrence, right? Because of the interesting dynamic with the group here within the complex, and because we don't have any residential properties, we do not have to, talk to parks about producing a park. You know, like if we put together a plat, one of the policies in, putting that plat together is, going to meet with, parks and talking about, potential parks and trails. And since we have parks represented here as well, that's something that they were okay with. The application for the zoning request will actually require us, which we've sent out already, to get signatures from Michelle Closey at Public Works, representing the city of Bismarck's interest in their portion of the property, with the lift station and things like that. Of course, we would have you folks, and then there would also be the state of North Dakota. And so, we are working with Daniel in the planning department to try to get, the individual that would ultimately sign for the state of North Dakota, which we believe is at the DOT. So that kind of is the zoning part. Now, the plating part, you have a series of leases out here. And so the leases that you have, because you may be moving things around and you may be having communal space, which ultimately might have been in lease space and things like that as you move forward. One of the concepts that we would recommend that we ultimately get to a point to have a conversation about is actually extinguishing the leases and going to a more development agreement type with everybody. That way you can define uses and you have the ability to have it where, you know, like right now, we replat and do these things, most likely you're gonna have some roads that probably go through these leases. And if you're reassessing communal space, you're definitely gonna be moving these things around. So having something you can work on, you know, the lease thing is very rigid and it doesn't allow your group to actually react to the things that you guys are managing. And so by having a developers agreement, it allows you to put in conditions, it allows you to put in uses, it allows you to kind of craft that whole thing together, but it also ties these other things together. Like, you know, you will be part of the committee, you know, there will be items for maintenance, you know, like all the other things that come into effect. So that is important when you start talking about multiple uses in a common space. You know, how does the common space get used? You know, who is the one to allow or approve or deny, right? So tying your board together to these things, I think, is very important. And that would be something that we did have a discussion to broach in front of the city to see if that was something that they felt was going to ultimately take care of some of their concerns, because having a private system within your campus requires you to have some acknowledgement about how that is managed, not only, you know, just if somebody's gonna use the parking lot on Tuesday because we got a race. Well, what about all these nuts and bolts things? So some of that can help tie this stuff together as you move forward. So kind of a long-winded, review and dissertation of kind of where we've landed so far. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Steve?
There's a couple questions. We talked about private road versus a public road, and then also private water service versus a public water service. Where's the advantage? Or which is the best route to look at?
Having a public right of way or putting a road in, right? That's the only way you'll be able to put that road in, is to have dedicated right of way. That will have the city of Bismarck as a participant to things that you would have to go back and ask for in the future. So, having a private road within an easement, if you decided like, oh, okay, we're gonna have this new communal thing and we need to move this and, you know, this space, I need more space here, right? Well, you could go in there, you could dedicate a new easement, you could move that road over, and you could do that as a committee. And so it gives you freedom to kind of allow you, as you move forward in the future, as things change, and of course, you see where you guys were at 20 years ago, and 10 years ago, and 5 years ago, right? So where do you end up 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now? What we're trying to do is we're trying to give you as many tools to put in your toolbox for you to better manage your system. And moving forward, collectively as a group, you are a business, right? Individually, you have your own endeavors. So as a collective group, you need to have tools that allow this group to do things, right? Because what if somebody says, well, I don't like that? Well, if you have a public right of way, the city may say, well, you know, God, you gotta replat if you're gonna change this right of way. So from a right of way aspect, you kind of get tied down to where you're at today. You know, so right now today, you're replatting because you want to go a different route and that plat doesn't allow you. So it's much easier to change an easement than it is to change a right of way.
How does it, let's move to P-Public and all of the private things that go with it. How does it impact building applications and things done to
Mhm.
any property within the confines?
So even though you are part of Burley County, right? You are in the city of Bismarck's jurisdiction. Anybody that sits and resides within the city of Bismarck's jurisdiction will be required to, upon having development, they will be required to produce a stormwater management plan. They will be required to produce a site plan. That will give you a site plan approval, which then you could apply if you have a building for a building permit with building inspection. And then that would give you a building permit. You had a parking lot. The city of Bismarck has requirements that would require you to have a site plan to get that approved. So either way you sit, you will ultimately be required to submit for development site plans through the city of Bismarck. You will be required to have building permits through the city of Bismarck. And so that doesn't matter if we are the hospital, BSC, you know, the fairgrounds, wherever, whatever we are, that is how we sit within that jurisdiction.
And that is the same as it is right now.
Today, if you weren't doing a zoning change, if you weren't talking about planning today, if you wanted to put a parking lot down there, you would be required to go to the city and do this. If you had a building, you will be required by the city of Bismarck to go through their development process to gain a building permit.
Do you feel, and this might be outside of your ability to speak to or comfortableness, do you feel that there's any benefit to having a group like this, the committee, for those types of requests versus doing them within the silos? Meaning if it's an individual project on your use agreement area, do you feel it's better to have a committee behind it or to go at it individually, or is it a net neutral?
The conversation that we had with the city of Bismarck was, we have a committee here to help manage the commonality of what's out here. And this group is able to manage themselves, right? From an individual standpoint, you want to do something, you come to the committee, and that is what the committee is there for, is to walk through that process to get to where that individual can do something. So that is important because you are the public, right? So if I wanted to come out here and say, hey, I would like to come out here and play too, I would have to sit in front of this board. I need to know that if I wanted to do that, that there is things that I could be treated just like everybody else. So my personal opinion is that this board is a board that has some power to say, hey, we've gone through these things and we've had these discussions and we have these issues and we don't have these issues and these issues got corrected. And so we're, you know, go on behalf of this board, submit that site plan. Because that's what we're selling. We're selling this committee is the group that's entrusted with this property to manage it. We're not selling that there's 8 individual groups and they get to, you know, do what, when. So that's why the city has come back and said, you know, we feel there's some good value here with how you're presenting this, because it really puts you guys on a playing field where you've got a committee to deal with. The city, my opinion would be the city would be more favorable to deal with the committee than 8 individuals, right? Because they're gonna get continuity. And that's very important for this group.
From the audience.
Jason, can you expand on the private versus public utility and right of way? I glazed over it pretty fast. I just want the board, I don't know if the board fully understands what they could be getting into. And to simplify it, if you go with private roadways and private utilities, the board would be on the hook for any repairs. Roads repaired, utilities busted, any of that stuff, it would have to come out of your pocket. Now, if it's a public, it's assessed. It's repaired by the city and it's assessed back to the property owner over an assessment period, 15 years, 10 years, whatever it is. The reason I stress this is that there are a few areas in our community where it is private roadways, private utilities. Businesses have been built. They weren't fully aware of it. Somebody ran into a fire hydrant. Now they have to go around to each one of those property owners, business owners, and collect for the repair of not only the hydrant, but they also happened to bust the water main. So they had to pay for digging up the water main as well. So I don't know if maybe I kind of explained it for you.
Yeah.
But just so in case everybody's not clear on what that is, I mean, those are different values and costs.
So does that mean that each of the user groups at this table would be responsible for
That
that?
would have to get defined.
Because
If-
I
if
would
you
see
went
that
with
it would be a
private.
county, so I'm gonna
Yeah.
put something together and
Yeah.
tell me if I'm wrong. It would be a potential cost to the county, of
And then
which it would be
collect.
really important to know what the balance is in our funds and why.
And you're exactly right. So
Is Jason, before you continue, is there a scenario where you can do private roadway but public utility easements? Has the city ever, because I mean, typically the utilities are running the right of way.
Yeah.
So is there a scenario where you say, okay, we want the flexibility of moving the roads around, so it's not lot and blocks, but there are dedicated utility easements where the city would see, okay, the sanitary sewer runs here, the water line runs here, that kind of stuff, and then you could peel off of that to make your connections for future buildings in the property if you decided to, hey, this area needs bigger land than that area, but we still want to have a commonality for utilities.
So the first thing is the private public. So having like for instance, a public water main, if there's a water main break, right? Then the city would come out and repair that break on the main line, not the service line. Okay, so you're going to have a cost if you have a water main break on your service line. One of the big key differences is how you meter this. You know, like if you're metering the campus, you could have a big one-time cost for these UCC charges, but then nobody would have a meter on their building, or if you had a meter to track the individual use to know how the water uses were going, then that would be an internal thing. Now, if you had a public water line going through here with public hydrants, and you had service lines come off to the building, then you can have a meter at the building. Then your use is metered at the building. And you would just pay for what your use is. So if you need a 2-inch water line, you need a 3/4 inch, that's how that would be. The road, private, public is, you guys have a fund that has dollars in it, so having a private roadway would be that if the road comes apart somewhere, then that would be a you cost, not the city cost. Having a public right of way, if there's roads that come apart then the city can come and fix that and they can assess it to the board, to the group, or it can be prepaid even by the group, right? The private road sitting in a public right of way, I guess I haven't seen too many situations that I can recall that sit like that. You know, let's say you want a 30-foot wide road in here and you want a rural road with ditches. What we don't know at this particular moment would be, would the city allow us to construct that? Are they gonna want to see a 40-foot road or a 50-foot road with curb and gutter and storm sewer? So the city would have some say into what that public road looks like. You would also, you know, most likely house that in a public right of way. You dedicate right of way to the city of Bismarck, to the public. And that's how that probably is gonna sit. So there's kind of two different cost structures here. I'm not exactly sure if the city would require a 40% prepayment on the pavement. So city has a policy in commercial zoned areas that, or industrial, that you would have a 40% prepayment for streets. So streets $100, you're gonna pay $40 of it. And then that's just them allowing or requiring the developer to have some skin in the game, so to speak. So if it is a public street that you would like to look at, then we would have to have some additional conversations. But at this particular moment with the zoning, we just got enough out there for the city to start thinking about, to get back to us when we do come back and have some more conversations about the plating. So, we do have some private streets in town. And I think back to 2010, when they first came about a lot, more common, we had situations where the HOAs, which the city was kind of starting to get that into planning. And so I think a lot of HOAs, you know, did follow through with that. And then, of course, you know, as Dave says, like, if you come and hit a hydrant, first thing they do is come and call the city and say, fix this. And then, you know, if they weren't taking dues and collecting money and doing all those things, then there were some issues with that, where it's like, well, we don't have any money to fix this. But that was a concept for developers to, you know, have a smaller footprint to put that road and everything in, and they didn't have to dedicate a big right of way. That's why I was mentioning, you know, like having this tied in with the developer's agreement, so there's an understanding of, you know, what you're repairing, what you're not. So let's say, for instance, we'll go one step further. You guys want to have some communal parking lots, right? Well, that surely will be something that there'll have to be funds for crack sealing and, you know, pavement repairs in the future and stuff like that. If you have a rest area, restrooms and things like that, or a communal building with some restrooms, that'll be another thing. So there will be some things that, depending on how you guys want to move forward, that there will be some fund expenditures that will come in for, you know, yearly maintenance. And then, of course, if you've got repairs or unforeseen things like water main breaks, if that water main's private and stuff like that. So the two lineal paths that you go, the compass is pointed kind of a little bit of a different direction on each course, and they have positives and they have negatives to each of them. But you can go either way and still get to what you want. We could dedicate a right of way and not dedicate the lots, but of course, if we dedicate a right of way, where that right of way goes through, you will inherently have a lot on the one side and a lot on the other side, right? So that would be a difference from, maybe you don't have 10 lots on that side of the road and 3 lots over here, and you just got the 2, but that's one of the consequences as well about having that. So, for instance, I could have a road that's private in an easement, and I could put a parking lot on each side of it, and that road could go right through that parking lot. And I just did something where I could now put a space there and utilize, more of that space.
Justin?
So. Has there been any discussion of how to develop like a best of both worlds scenario? Because I could see from a standpoint of preventing surprise costs, the public approach is the better one. But at the same time, I can anticipate that the county is going to say, we want to make sure that the users within that are paying their share and that the county isn't subsidizing them. How much of that is working a deal with the city and how much is that, once we've got the plan with the city in place, working the deal with the user groups internally so that we're able to manage the payment of the costs more efficiently with the city, but then making sure that the users are not becoming, are not being too subsidized by the public.
Sure.
Within that model.
And we can definitely, continue to carry this conversation to the city and explore that, and see what their first blush is. That could maybe be something if they're willing to have some sort of a development agreement. The only way to really know that is to sit them down again and to broach that and see what their willingness is. We did ask them, in this meeting, it's a very preliminary meeting, but we did ask them to, get together with staff and have a conversation internally and come back with thoughts on things, that could further, us as we move into plating. But, that was not a question that we had asked at this moment.
Steve?
Follow up on Dustin's question, are we getting to a point in the next 2 or 3 weeks or sometime here that this group gets together and talks about some of these issues and the thoughts, and get back to what was brought up last month, the dreams, ideas, but talk about these commonalities out there and how the plating moves forward with some of these concepts and address some of these questions. And from my standpoint, this is a public facility. This is a major park development now that we're addressing. And there's a huge part of this that is public use for the other activities and things that happen out there. So I think that's conversations we need to have, is how do we look at this as operating in the future? Similar to the parks, the Saratoga, the Cottonwoods, the 8 Creeks, that this is the type of a park development here now. And those groups that are out there are very valuable for offering those programs and sustaining their programs first.
Right.
And so then how do we develop the rest of this facility out there to support that, but also support more public use and of the public gathering that is proposed out there. So I think we're going to be at the point. The last meeting we weren't, obviously, but I think now with your information, we're at a much better position in November here as we keep this thing moving along. That we said we have a work session and talk about these things, how the programs work, what we're looking at for common spaces and the deal to do that. To me, a public road is, the public facilities are a key component of this, and not to be private where it hinders the operations and actually sets organizations up for failure. In the long run. It's hard enough to keep a program operating on a facility, but then if you have all these other costs, it's not the common in this community. It's not common anyway. So we have to come up with that agreement here amongst us to move this forward.
Yeah, and I do agree, and that's very good comments that, as I started with, we've got 2 paths. We've got a zoning path and a plating path. And we would like to start the zoning path. We also have brought some information relative to the plating aspect, so you get to start thinking about the things and the decisions that are gonna be in front of you to come back with as a committee to say, this is where we land, right? And so that will take some time for you guys to land on what that is, you know. This next step, even though it's a step that's on the front of the plating, it's kind of like very important because it defines your plat, right? And so we can go to a meeting or two with the zoning and we can pause and we can bring that plat in at such time as you are ready. But in order to start talking about this whole process, we wanted to get this in front of the city to get those initial reactions so that we can get you folks thinking about this and how you guys see yourselves and how you see your management and how you want it to be. And there's a lot of great examples out in the community that show you, you know, how success and how things we look at and say, boy, could have did that better, right? And that's the important part of it is to take all those examples and to provide yourself with the best opportunity. So, yeah, you're gonna need to have some work sessions, I feel like, and have kind of this conversation and start really talking about, you know, who are we? What are we going to be? What's that goal? And it doesn't have to be, you know, I've got 5 buildings or 10 buildings, but it does have to be like, how are we gonna operate ourselves? How are we gonna, you know, manage our money? How are we gonna do all these things? How does the public react to this? How does the public use it? So all those things kind of should develop kind of and sit you down somewhere on where you think you need to be.
I would imagine that most, if not all, of the stakeholders sitting around the table would like the opportunity to take that back to their boards or their committees respectively, so. But, am I correct in saying that we cannot finalize the zoning until the plat has been completed?
We can submit the application
Right.
and we can start doing that. We would generally like to see the zoning and the plating kind of get keyed back up at the end.
And I believe we discussed at a previous meeting that, that February, March timeframe would be the latest to account for any requests for bids or for work to be completed out there during the construction season.
So that's a little bit of a different avenue, but what we like to say from a development world is we will get our best bids for things like grading and other than situational pieces, we like to, you know, grade and go out for bid in the spring. So we like to get our bids, you know, late winter, early spring. We like to get water and sewer plans. So that is something though, just to be clear, like, you guys have 2 pieces that are approved for movement today. So right now it's the zoning and plating, and then it's to work on kind of this zoning, plating, conceptual, how you see yourself and to come up with, you know, what is it we're trying to get to. So from a board standpoint, the commonality portions of that, you know, what's this piece that we're going to represent? You know, is that campgrounds and restrooms and is it parking lots? And so that component is kind of that conceptual component. But then you would need to go back to that board and approve those next components, the design components, right? So, and that's what you're speaking about is getting the ultimate plan is getting through this whole process and then getting to a point where you design the things that you want to have and then getting those things out for bid and then getting those constructed so you can develop your campus. And so, you know, that's not in my control, but typically we'd like to see grading, water sewer in the spring, storm sewer in the summer, try to get our paving things done. Now, some of that changes if the city is going to construct, like for instance, if you have public right of way, a public street, you can petition to have special assessment done on the paving project and the storm project. And so the city would work with us and we would get bids procured for the storm sewer and the production of the streets, and it would be constructed under the responsibility of the city, and then it would be assessed back. Now, unless there's some caveat there that is out there between the city and the county, I believe that would be a valid process. But that is something that I have not talked to the city about, but I can get that information and report back.
Right.
Do work group, I'm gonna call it a work group, do those meetings could happen at night, so there'd be more time? Do they have to happen, with recordings and stuff? Or could they be held, like if this room is busy, we could be out at the extension office or in your hotel that is heated? Could you find that out from, I don't know who?
Typically, it's a matter of forum.
Yeah, that's what,
Like a quorum
you know, as long as
problem?
we adhere to all of open meetings,
Well, you would notice it, I understand that, but the
Yeah.
question is how.
and I don't
like,
believe
could
that we're
we-
even required by law to record this one.
Okay.
It's better that we do, just
Yeah.
because of things.
But-
Yeah, oh yeah, you have Wi-Fi, so we can bring the out.
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking, because it's gonna have to most likely be at night.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we can't,
out
we're not
there.
going to be able to make inroads.
Yeah.
Over a lunch hour, one time
Yeah.
a month.
No, and I was gonna say, and this room is often busy, so I would just say we should.
Yeah.
And
Move.
there might even be, in the details of it, there might even be a way to work a deal with the city to do a sort of a subscription fee model that would avoid time-based special assessments that would,
Yeah.
draw out the costs, reduce the ongoing cost to a more manageable level, while at the same time making sure that the services are there. That way, all the user groups, their share is minimized as well. Because of the work that we've done on special assessment task force at the Bismarck level and the legislation that we've gotten in place, there might be a way to massage this to make it work a lot better than a typical operation, because if you're talking about two governmental entities at the top, there's a little bit more flexibility there.
So you can see like how some of this conversation and input and direction can shape really how this plat may come together. And so there may be just that time element in there where there's a pause to get through the work sessions and the work groups, to get through conversations with the city, back and forth dialogue, and to get wherever it is that we are going to land on.
I just have one other question. Okay, I was gonna say Steve, Mr. Balkan too. Are you working with Wayne Munson? Because I would hate for us to spin our wheels talking about public, private, this, that, when really the decision's gonna come up to the commission. And so a person could maybe just get their feel right away in November, be on their next meeting or whatever, and that way we're not spinning our wheels and think we're gonna be lucky and get to have, public roads, but and they're gonna vote, no, we're gonna have our own roads and we're taking care of it because we're the county and we're gonna have our own people maintain those roads like they're doing now, because that's what they're doing now. So I would hate for us to spin our wheels on some of that where it's not we can recommend something, but I just think you should get in front of them and make them vote for that stuff.
I think that one of the key things, are you guys set up to be able to help with developing the cost management scenarios of the way we could do things, as far as the way that things are generally done already, and then leaving the, plan C as something that maybe is a customized thing. Because if we could show side by side, here's what it's gonna cost under this approach, here's what it's gonna cost under this approach, that's going to make the county's job easier. And it would be good for us to at least ballpark that in some fashion. If we can say, well, this is gonna be 30% cheaper, this is gonna be 50% cheaper, they're going to understand that, because until we have anything like that on paper, they're gonna be trying to make a decision without any information.
Yeah, I think that's beholden upon this committee to gather the information and present it to it. I mean, in our established chain of, it's not command, but chain of communication, that information needs to be taken out of this committee, then presented to the county and then come back down. I don't know that we can just wait until the county decides on something. I think we need to work ahead on that.
If we're asking them a question without any information,
Right.
they're not going to even want to make a decision, period, I would
So now,
suspect.
yes, you a question I didn't let you answer, but
Yeah, and so, you know, under a private system, you know, let's just say that you're gonna have an asphalt road, right? So, I mean, you could be looking at, you know, a mill and overlay after 15 years. You could be looking at full depth replacement. I mean, really, it's gonna come down to, you know, what gets put out here and the use,
Mhm.
and, you know, basically how much it gets abused, right? And so there is some variance there, but, you know, the private road maintenance is a forever cost and there is a replacement cost. Now, that replacement cost can be there also with a special assessment district under a city's, built system. But the difference would be, of course, is, you know, the city could come in and do those things when that pavement is wore out. And they would reassess that. So, you know, what's the value to that?
I'm going to unfortunately have to cut you short. I know we're up against another meeting right now, so if we can table these discussions to the next meeting. And then we'll work on looking up, you know, like a working group and that sort of thing. I think that's a great idea. So if I don't hear any objections to adjourning the meeting, we will stand in adjournment until our next meeting, which I don't remember what it was, but we'll email you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, we can't get it. But yes, learn it something. Is that what? I'm saying like there's bars over. They're about $25.
Yeah.
But I know Annette had said sometimes when she's at training, they get, like, they just have them laying around.
Yeah. So. Don't worry, we're pretty good about trying to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the thing.
Yeah. Like the wind thing was new and then it's like $25 was enough for one person because you could make one window or whatever. I'm like, no, I would.